Hi everybody, Scott here. In this video I want to talk about shadow work. And what I mean by shadow work essentially is where we disconnect either a positive or a negative trait or characteristic or emotion from our consciousness, from our conscious awareness. It's like we shut it down and disconnect from it. So how this can happen is if someone separates from anger, for instance, they suppress that anger, then it's most likely that they're going to be highly sensitive to anybody that shows anger, demonstrates anger, or even the hint of it. That could be quite anxiety provoking for somebody. However, we can also disconnect from positive traits. For instance, maybe success, and for whatever reason we feel like we're not allowed to be successful, and there could be lots of reasons for that. That we then project that sensitivity. We then project that success onto other people, and so we find people that are successful in a way that we admire, and we it's like they become our heroes. They become our idols in a way, where we project all of our potential success onto them and kind of worship them in a sense. And in a way we could like live vicariously through the success of others, because for whatever reason we've disconnected from our ability to actualize success. So we can put a whole range of things in the shadow. We can put certain positive traits or characteristics, negative traits. We can put it all, a sort of whole combination of those into shadow, and essentially that becomes our shadow. And the way our shadow manifests is when we have a strong reaction, you could say either negatively or positively, on other people. So, for example, the person that has disconnected and suppressed anger, whenever there's someone that shows anger, they could have a really strong reaction to that. Or if we have put like arrogance into shadow or something like that, and somebody shows arrogance, we can find ourselves loathing that person, like having really strong reactions about people that might show some form of arrogance. Or if it's someone we admire, we can sort of put them on a pedestal and kind of almost diminish our sense of self to rise them up even further. It's like we just project all of our potential success onto them, and we raise them up. So for people wanting to address their shadow, there's actually quite a number of techniques. I'm going to give one way that we can sort of examine what our shadow might be and work on that. And it's essentially choosing somebody in your life, or that you've known or have to deal with, that you have a really hard time accepting them. You could say loathe them, really dislike them. And then choose somebody that you really, really admire. And write a letter, not a letter you would give them. This is for your own use. Write a letter to them, describing for the person you don't like, describing what you don't like about them, and then for the other person, describe what you admire about them. And so you write that letter out, and then you stand in front of a mirror and replace all the yous or you with I. And what you do with the letter is you stand in front of, or the letters, is you stand in front of a mirror and you turn all the you and yours words into I and mine. And essentially you just read it back to yourself with the I's and mine. And you do that both for the person that you dislike, and for the person that you admire. And whatever those words are in both. So, confident for the positive person, it could be, you're confident or not easily hurt, or those sorts of things. And for the one we don't like, it could be, arrogant or selfish or self-centered, or, those sorts of words. And essentially all of those words become a representation of our own shadow. And in a sense, what's happening with our shadow is we have it's that whole thing of whatever we have an issue with in somebody else, we have that same issue in some way. And that kind of ties into the whole judgment theme of, whoever, before we take the plank out, the speck out of somebody else's eye, we take the log out of our own eye. It can be a little challenging because when we see somebody acting in an arrogant way, and we don't see that we don't act in an arrogant way, but we certainly have an issue with somebody who is arrogant. What's essentially happening there is that we've judged we've judged arrogance in some way, either, maybe in a bad, like it's a bad thing. Arrogance is a bad thing, and we must never show arrogance, and so we suppress it. And what's essentially happening is that is still a plank in our eye, because we are controlled by arrogance as much as the person who's being arrogant, because we're suppressing our ability to be arrogant, if that makes sense. So we're trying to hide any way that it would come out. So on the surface of things, it looks like, well, I'm not arrogant, they're arrogant, and they should deal with their arrogance. However, the person who's doing the arrogance versus the person that has judged arrogance as bad and has pushed it into shadow is just as much controlled by arrogance. And in a sense, you could say that, yes, they have an issue with arrogance, but so do I, in that I'm afraid of showing it, versus the person who seems to be very easily able to show it. And instead of addressing our issue with it, we put all of our energy into, in a sense, judging them for having arrogance when actually we've judged arrogance. And we could do that with all the aspects of shadow. So for the person who's afraid to succeed, and they've put success into shadow, then there's that sort of equal and opposite positive lifting up of the other person. It's like we just sort of shower that other person with praise for their success. And in a sense, by doing that, we're sort of pushing ourselves down so that we don't become successful, or we aren't seen to be successful for whatever reason, whether it's fear of failure, or maybe a person got shamed for some successes in childhood, and so they're afraid to succeed because of the pain that it caused them. So it could be a whole range of different things, and the exercise I've outlined will sort of help unpack what that is. But essentially what we do with that list is we basically go through it and say to ourselves, in some way, shape or form, I have an issue with all the things that I have an issue with them about. Or with the positive traits, I'm also rejecting my ability to show these positive traits for whatever reason. And the important thing to do really is to ask the why question. Why have I done that? Why do I have an issue with arrogance? Or why do I have an issue with success? Or why do I have an issue with confidence or fear or whatever it is? Where might that come from? And sometimes the why of it, where it comes from, can be releasing. It can be helpful to sort of be free. And in some respects, it's about releasing the judgment over the trait, because the more that we judge something, the more we're controlled by it. So it's almost like I need to set myself free to be arrogant, so that so that I'm not controlled by arrogance, and it probably won't leak out in other ways. And what I mean by that is, often what we put in shadow, we act out in inappropriate ways. So again, if we've got an issue with arrogance, we might find ourselves that arrogant kind of bursts out in a way that is embarrassing, and then we quickly pull back on quickly hide that arrogance again, because we're not allowed to show arrogance. So essentially, we just need to get to the why of it. Why might I have an issue with this? Why might I be rejecting this part of myself? And again, it's not that like if I'm got an issue with them because they appear arrogant, that I also am an arrogant person like them. It's possible that it's being pushed into shadow, or we've judged it, and we're essentially controlled by arrogance, in the sense that that person controls us because of our emotional reaction to them, but we're also minimizing our own ability to be free and be our true selves, because we're putting energy into not being a certain way, and then it leaks out in some way, because it's like the fear of it coming out kind of causes it to grow and then come out in ways that it actually wouldn't have if we didn't have an issue with it, or judge it as good or bad in the first place. And so once we get to the why of it, the dynamics that set it up in the first place, we're in a much better place to address it. However, it doesn't necessarily require the why, more just an acknowledgement, that I for whatever reason, I have an issue with these various things. And it's almost like it's about setting ourselves free to be that way. So it's possible to actually reframe the shadow as part of a process to sort of reintegrating the shadow back into the self. So somebody who says that they're not smart enough, I'm not very smart, and so when they find a smart person, they're like the most amazing person in the world, and sort of elevate their smartness and decrease their level of intelligence, at least within the self. A reframe could require a process of actually looking into intelligence, and that there's many different types of intelligence, and perhaps they've rejected their type of intelligence and seen other forms of intelligence as like the only way someone can be intelligent, and sort of rise them up and put themselves down. And so it's very possible that they actually haven't identified their own form of intelligence, whether it's emotional intelligence or spatial intelligence, mathematical, science, physical intelligence, all these different sorts of intelligences. So it can be about sort of turning that rigid shadow belief and kind of breaking it apart and teasing it out to recognize that there's different forms of intelligence. So reframing can be a very helpful tool. In relation to the letters that a person could write, is essentially taking out all of those key words and then putting I am in front of every word. So it could be, I am jealous, or I am confident, I am assertive, I am diligent, these sorts of things. And essentially, for the positive ones, it's kind of like choosing to recognize that they actually have the ability to exercise those positive traits, like I can be confident, I can be assertive, these sorts of things. So it's almost like stating that is actually possible. The other one is, with the more negative, is about kind of confronting it in the sense that, let's say, saying to themselves in the mirror, I am arrogant, I am, or I have the potential to be arrogant, I have the potential to be I am fearful, or I am anxious, whatever has been pushed into shadow. It's kind of like confronting that. Like it wouldn't be the end of the world if some aspects of those negative traits were to be seen, and sort of just confronting that by saying, I have the potential to do this, I can be arrogant, or I can be this, or I can be that, can sort of reduce some of the energy that's been kind of locked in trying to never show that negative trait or that negative emotion or whatever it is. You could almost suggest, I could suggest from a spiritual perspective, is like taking one's judgment off those aspects of shadow. So choosing not to judge arrogance, judge assertiveness, judge intelligence, these sorts of things. Taking our judgment off those things. And what essentially this whole process is about kind of becoming a whole self by reducing the amount of energy that goes into trying not to show things, like show specific positive or negative traits that we've pushed into shadow. Now we're free to be ourselves. And that doesn't mean that we'll become an arrogant person or whatever. In fact, it will be the opposite, in fact, that as we set ourselves free to have arrogance, we won't display because we're not trying to hide it. So by reframing what's in our shadow and confronting what's in our shadow, taking our judgment off what we've put into shadow, we are much more free to be who we are, and a lot less energy going into trying not to be what we don't want to be. In a sense, sets us free to be who we actually are able to be. And it sort of opens up one to living life more to the fullest. So anyway, I hope that this video has resonated, and if it has, feel free to subscribe, or certainly like this video if you do like it, and I'll see you again in another video.